Well, here's the answers to question 5 and 6. Which of the following is a neurotransmitter? Select the best response. Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, or dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. The answer is all of them: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. For question 6, the neurotransmitters are released from the axon terminal, receptor sites, dendrites, synapses. The answer is axon terminal. Through this presentation, now we're going to go into the genetic component of addiction, and we're going to be looking at seeing how prevalent it is and how one is predisposed. And research has recognized that we can have the vulnerability of being predisposed up to 40–60%, that we could have certain particular genes, gene clusters that may affect one being predisposed to addiction. And the variabilities can be through some variability between drugs and also some variability through gender, and they've seen this through research. Here's a slide that is showing the DNA, and it's showing the chromosome location, and depending on in the DNA, if there's any particular mutations, individuals could be vulnerable for being more likely to be addicted to a substance, or predisposed of when the addiction could actually come into the process of using. Genetics can be either increase the risk or actually can be protective of not being predisposed. But here is just different examples of when you're looking at different receptors of how they could affect a greater use and attraction to alcohol, and then possibly makes the response to morphine, the co-receptors, and the LDH, which is affected to alcoholism. So they would be looking at your DNA and seeing, depending on the chromosomes, if there's any particular mutation that you could be exposed to these vulnerabilities. Genetics is, they've seen, has one alcoholic parent could be 3 to 4 times increased risk of alcoholism. So with this information that we receive with research as clinicians, how can we assess this if we don't have their DNA? Well, we can do a genogram on them, and we can see if we are looking at generations, 3 generations back, to see if there was alcoholism or substance use, and see if it is continuing to the next generation. And it could be environmental, or it could be through genetics. And the vulnerability to what? It can recognize through genetic components could be that when you start using drugs, it could be which particular drugs that you would be more likely prone to use, the continuing of drug use, becoming addicted itself, and the particular type of drug that you would be predisposed to wanting. So there's a lot of ways that the genes can be affected towards being involved in, more prone towards addiction. It's interesting and fascinating that they have that. I'm going to end here, and then you will be asked some questions.